Welcome to another deep dive, everybody. Today, we're diving into something I think we can all relate to, communication. And to help us navigate this, we have Anna with us. She's a professor from University 365, and she knows a lot about this book, The Science of Effective Communication.
Oh, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Now, this book, it's not just, some light tips and tricks. It actually gets into the nitty-gritty of, like, the psychology behind how we talk to each other. And then it takes us all the way to, giving us actual skills to use, like dealing with tough conversations, even persuasion. It's quite comprehensive.
Yeah, you're right. And the author even kicks things off with his own story. I mean, he was in his 20s before he realized that his lack of social skills was actually holding him back. But, he really stresses that anyone can learn these skills. It's not like you're born a good communicator. You can actually improve.
I like that. That's a good takeaway right there. It's easy to think, oh, some people are just natural talkers and the rest of us, now we just have to struggle. But the book starts with this basic skill, and it's one I think we all think we're good at listening. But are we really?
That's the question, right? Active listening. It's so important. But I think a lot of us, we're only half listening, waiting for our turn to speak. The author even brings in this sound expert, Julian Treasure, who says that people only remember like 25% of what they hear. And he blames it on, well, our obsession with technology, all this recorded information.
That's true. It's like we're so used to just rewinding if we miss something on a podcast.
Yeah.
But in a real conversation, you can't just hit rewind. One thing I found helpful was his advice on dealing with those people, we all know them, who tell the same stories over and over again.
Oh, I know exactly what you mean. It's like they're stuck on repeat. But the book actually gives you options. Like if it's someone you care about, maybe you just listen patiently. Or, you can gently steer the conversation to something new. And then there's always the option to just gracefully exit the conversation.
That's right. Sometimes saving your sanity is the best option. Now, the book then gets into something I never really thought about, making your voice more attractive. And I don't mean singing lessons or anything like that. It's more about those subtle things that can change how people perceive you, right?
Yeah. It's not about being perfect or anything, but being clear, engaging, genuine. He talks about things like loosening up your lips, breathing from your diaphragm, and changing your pitch so you're not monotone.
It's kind of like thinking of your voice as an instrument. You can learn to play better. The book even suggests getting feedback from, friends or family, or even working with a voice coach if you're serious about it.
Yeah, that's right. And thinking about how we communicate and what impacts it, it's a good time to bring up how the book deals with the internet and how that impacts how we talk to each other.
This is where things get interesting. The author, he's not anti-technology or anything like that,
Mhm.
but he makes this argument that too much internet can actually hurt our ability to have good conversations.
That's right. I mean, think about it. Online, everything is fast, fragmented. You get used to skimming, reacting, not really listening deeply.
It's true. I catch myself doing that all the time, scrolling. My brain is on autopilot.
Exactly. And it goes deeper than that. Online, it's easier to just disengage, to get personal when there's conflict instead of working through it constructively.
And then there's the whole social comparison thing. It's hard to escape that online, right? Everyone's presenting their best selves, and it makes it hard to connect genuinely with others.
And the author, he actually did this digital detox experiment, took a break from all the online stuff, and he said it really did help. His conversations were deeper, more meaningful.
It's something to think about, right? Finding that balance between being connected online and, well, being present in real life.
Definitely. Speaking of feeling comfortable interacting with people, the book goes on to talk about something a lot of people struggle with, the fear of being judged, in social situations.
Oh, I think we've all been there.
Yeah.
You walk into a room full of strangers and it's like, oh my gosh, what are they thinking about me?
It's so common, right? But the book's advice on this is pretty simple, except that judgment is going to happen. People are always evaluating each other. But here's the thing. Most of those judgments, they're never actually shared. So why worry about them,
It's like that saying, what other people think of me is none of my business.
Right, exactly. And the book even talks about reframing rejection. The author tells the story about being rejected for a date. But instead of taking it personally, he saw it as, just incompatibility, not that he wasn't good enough.
That's a good way to look at it. And it leads us to something that's really important for any conversation, empathy. It's a buzzword these days, but the book actually breaks it down.
It does. It talks about really entering into the other person's world, seeing things from their perspective.
And it's not about agreeing with them or giving them advice, right? It's just about trying to understand their feelings.
Exactly. And it gives some techniques for showing empathy, like active listening, reflecting feelings back to the person. Sometimes people just need to be heard.
Yeah, you're right. Advice can come later. And I appreciate that the book also touched on the importance of self-care, especially if you're someone who, works with people a lot, maybe in a helping profession. You're constantly exposed to other people's emotions.
Yeah, you have to know when to step back, to recharge. You can't pour from an empty cup.
Right. Now, the book also gives us this practical tool to help keep conversations flowing. It's called the F4D method,
Ah, yes, the F4D method.
and that stands for family, occupation, recreation, and dreams. Did I get that right?
You got it. It's this framework for coming up with conversation topics that are, universally relatable. So instead of those awkward silences, you could ask about someone's family. Maybe that leads into a conversation about their childhood or, their values. Or you could ask about their occupation, learn about their career path.
It's not a rigid script. It's more like a jumping off point. You're using these areas, family, occupation, recreation, dreams, to find common ground, to spark a deeper conversation.
Exactly. And the book gives you examples for each element of ordeal. Like, say you're at a party, you could break the ice by asking about someone's hobbies. Or you could mention a news story about education to transition into talking about someone's job.
It's like a cheat code for conversations.
Mm.
And it actually leads us nicely into the book's deeper dive into asking good questions.
Yes, asking good questions can really help us get to know someone, to move beyond small talk. The book even shares examples of Arthur Aaron's closeness-generating questions, which have actually been proven to, create a feeling of intimacy between strangers.
Those sound fascinating. What are some of those questions?
Well, one of them is, given the choice of anyone in the world, who would you want as a dinner guest? And another one is, if you could change anything about how you were raised, what would it be?
Wow, those are really deep questions.
Yeah.
And it all comes back to listening, doesn't it? If you're not really listening, you can't ask good follow-up questions.
It's all connected, absolutely. And the book even talks about this thing called the parroting technique, which can help shy people open up more. It's basically just repeating the last few words someone said, but as a question. It's a gentle nudge to get them to elaborate.
I love those little nuggets of wisdom, things you can actually use. And
Mm.
speaking of putting these ideas into practice, you being from University 365, I'm curious, do these principles align with what U365 does?
That's a great question. There's a lot of overlap, I have to say. I mean, U365 really emphasizes active listening, asking insightful questions, fostering empathy, and that's all central to the book, too.
So it's not just about delivering information, it's about creating a learning environment where students feel comfortable participating, really engaging.
Yeah, exactly. And we actually use this unique method called UNOP. It stands for University 365 Neuroscience-Oriented Pedagogy.
Okay, now that sounds impressive, but what does it actually mean?
Well, basically, it means we teach in a way that aligns with, how our brains actually learn best. So we incorporate things like the Pomodoro technique, which breaks down study sessions into focused intervals, and that helps students absorb and retain information better. We also use mind mapping, which helps them visually organize and connect concepts.
That sounds a lot more engaging than the traditional lecture format.
We also use things like binaural sounds, which can help with focus and retention. And we even have personalized AI mentors that provide real-time feedback and support to the students.
AI mentors, that's pretty cool. I'd love to hear more about that.
We even have a dedicated life management program, which we call ULM. It stands for University 365 Life Management. And this program helps students take these principles and apply them to their everyday lives. One of the key tools we use in ULM is something called the LIPS system.
LIPS? Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
LIPS stands for Life Interests Project System. You can kind of think of it as a digital second brain, helping students organize their lives, achieve their goals.
That's a really interesting concept.
Yeah, and a core element of LIOAS is something we call the CARE framework. Collect, action plan, review, execute. So it's this streamlined workflow that helps them manage their time, prioritize their tasks, stay on track.
It sounds like University 365 is really pushing the boundaries of education. It's not just academics, it's about giving students the skills they need to actually succeed in life.
That's exactly it. Yeah, it really is. It's about the whole picture. Now, going back to the book for a second, we talked about listening, even how our voices sound, but does it get into The more challenging stuff, like what to do when you disagree with someone or how to be more persuasive.
Yeah, that's the real test, isn't it?
It does. There's actually a whole chapter on dealing with heated discussions. And it's interesting. It starts by talking about anger in a different way. It says anger itself isn't bad, it's how we express it that matters.
Oh, that's interesting. Because usually we're told to just suppress anger,
Right.
right? But maybe it's more about, expressing it in a healthy way.
Exactly. The book encourages us to acknowledge our anger and the other person's anger too, but to set those boundaries so things don't, get out of control.
Okay, so what are some tips for when things start to get tense? Because
Sure.
I know me personally, I tend to get flustered and then I can't even think straight.
One tip is to try to stay calm. Speak at your normal volume, even if you're feeling upset. Shouting never really helps. And it also says to, stick to the issue at hand. Don't bring up old stuff or things that aren't really relevant.
Oh, I hate when people do that. It's like they're trying to win by just throwing everything they can at you.
The book calls that stockpiling. And it suggests that you just gently but firmly redirect the conversation back to the main point, even if you have to repeat yourself a few times.
So it's about being assertive, but in a way that keeps things focused. And I guess active listening is important here too, right? Even when you're disagreeing, you still have to try to hear what the other person is saying.
Absolutely. Active listening helps us understand, where they're coming from. And that can actually help de-escalate the situation. The book also has advice on dealing with people who are, intentionally trying to provoke a reaction.
Oh.
They call those people goaders.
Oh, yeah, those are the worst.
It basically says to just disengage, take a break. Because there's no point in trying to reason with someone who just wants to argue.
It's like picking your battles.
Hmm.
Okay, so we've talked about disagreements, but what about persuasion? Does the book have any insights on how to, you know, influence others effectively?
It does. It goes into the psychology of persuasion, talks about the things that make us more likely to be swayed by someone, things like authority, likability, reciprocity, and consensus.
Those sound interesting. Can you break those down a little bit?
Sure. So the authority principle, it basically says that we're more likely to be persuaded by someone we see as an expert. So if you're trying to convince someone of something, it helps to highlight your own experience or knowledge on the topic.
So it's not about being bossy. It's about showing you know what you're talking about.
Right. And then there's likability. We tend to be persuaded by people we like. So building rapport, finding common ground. That can go a long way.
That makes sense. It's hard to listen to someone you just don't enjoy being around, even if they have a good point.
Yeah.
What about reciprocity?
Reciprocity is the idea that we feel obligated to return favors, So if you've done something nice for someone, they're more likely to be open to what you have to say later on.
Kind of like a you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours kind of thing.
Exactly. And then lastly, there's consensus.
Okay, tell me about consensus.
So consensus is the idea that we're more likely to do something if we see other people doing it. It's like that social proof thing. If you can show that your idea or, whatever you're asking for, it's something that other people are already doing, you're more likely to get buy-in.
So like if I'm trying to get my team to use a new system, I could mention that other successful companies are already using it.
Exactly. But the book goes deeper than just explaining these principles. It actually gives you a framework for putting together a persuasive argument. It says to start by explaining why the issue is important, then state your position clearly, and then establish your credibility, back up your points with evidence, give examples, things like that.
It's like a recipe for a winning argument. You're not just expressing opinions, you're building a case.
Yeah, and it also stresses the importance of acknowledging the other person's counter-arguments. You're showing them that you've considered their point of view and that
Yeah.
you're willing to, have a respectful debate, not just trying to steamroll them.
It's about respecting their intelligence
Yeah.
and giving them space to, process what you're saying. This book is really amazing. It's so practical. But does it address any, unique situations, like, say, communicating with someone who is hearing impaired or navigating conversations in a professional setting?
It absolutely does. It has whole chapters on those very topics. For
Hmm.
example, with hearing impaired individuals, it emphasizes patience, clear articulation, and using visual cues. And it encourages those with hearing impairments to be upfront about their needs.
So it's about adapting your communication style to fit the situation and making sure everyone feels comfortable and included.
Exactly. And when it comes to professional settings, the book gives advice on handling all sorts of things, like making a complaint gracefully or acing a job interview.
Okay, I'm curious, what kind of advice does it give for those specific situations?
Well, for making complaints, it says to stay calm, stick to the facts, use neutral language, avoid personal attacks, and be clear about what you're hoping to achieve.
So being assertive but professional. What about job interviews?
For job interviews, it says to prepare your answers to common questions, keep them concise, engaging, practice your delivery so you come across as confident, and be sure to ask thoughtful questions. It shows you're interested. It even gets into body language and your tone of voice, emphasizing that your nonverbal communication needs to match your words.
Wow, this book really does seem to cover everything. It's got the foundational stuff, but then it also gets really specific, gives you strategies for all kinds of challenging situations.
It really is like a toolbox for improving your communication skills.
I love how it uses examples that are relatable and gives advice you can actually use. You know, you mentioned a technique earlier, the broken record technique. Could you remind me what that is?
Oh, right. That's a strategy for asserting yourself when someone is being unreasonable or dismissive. You calmly repeat your request or statement over and over again. Use slightly different phrasing each time. And you just keep doing it until you get the response you need.
So it's a polite but persistent way of standing your ground.
Exactly. It works because it doesn't escalate the situation, but it makes it clear you're not going to back down.
Now, going back to something we discussed before, the book emphasizes self-care, especially for people who interact with others a lot.
Mm.
Does it actually give any strategies for avoiding burnout, compassion fatigue?
It really stresses the importance of setting boundaries, in all areas of life, personal and professional. It says we need to recognize our own emotional limits, know when we need a break. And it also suggests creating a self-care routine with activities that help us recharge.
So basically, you can't help others if you're not taking care of yourself first.
Right. And it also talks about being compassionate with ourselves, accepting that we're not going to be perfect, we're going to make mistakes, but it's about learning from them, and keep growing.
Yeah, it's a journey, isn't it? Becoming a better communicator. This has been such a great conversation. I'm feeling inspired to really work on my communication skills. And it's really cool how U365 is taking these ideas and weaving them into how you approach education. Before we wrap up, I'm curious about one last thing from the book.
Hmm.
Does it talk about communicating with people in positions of authority?
It does. There's a whole section on how to navigate those conversations, which can be a bit tricky sometimes.
I think that's something a lot of people struggle with, finding that balance between being assertive and respectful, especially when there's that power dynamic.
Yeah, it can be. It can be tough. But the book, it suggests kind of shifting your mindset going in, like assume the person in authority, that they're actually open to hearing your perspective.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's easy to go in already feeling intimidated, but maybe it's better to just assume, good intentions, that they want to hear what you have to say.
Exactly. And it also talks about, being direct and honest about your views, even if they're different from the authority figures. It says that respectful disagreement, it can actually be a sign of strength, and it can lead to a more productive conversation.
So it's about being assertive but respectful,
Yeah.
like finding that sweet spot where you're standing up for yourself, but also being mindful of, their position.
Right. And the book acknowledges that, sometimes you might feel intimidated, unsure of how to, really assert yourself. And in those cases, it suggests having an advocate, like a support person with you.
Okay, interesting. Like a buddy system for tough conversations.
Yeah, exactly. It could be a colleague, a friend, a family member, someone who can, just be there for you emotionally and maybe help you articulate your thoughts more clearly.
Yeah, it's like having backup. It can definitely give you more confidence going in. It's amazing this book really does cover it all. We've learned so much.
Yeah.
But if you had to pick, like, just 3 key takeaways for our listeners, what would they be?
Oh, that's a tough one. But I think first and foremost, active listening. It's the foundation of all good communication. It's
Yeah.
more than just hearing the words. It's really trying to understand, the other person's perspective, their feelings, all of it.
So put down the phone,
Yeah.
step away from the computer,
Yeah.
and just be present.
Exactly. And then second, I'd say asking good questions. Good questions, they can really help you connect with someone on a deeper level. You can move beyond, just the surface stuff.
Be curious. It shows you're interested and engaged.
Yes. And then lastly, I'd say empathy. It's that ability to really put yourself in the other person's shoes, understand and validate their feelings, even if you don't agree with them. It's really what connects us as humans.
Those are great takeaways. And it strikes me that all 3 of them, active listening, asking good questions, empathy, they're all woven into how University 365 approaches education.
Right. You're absolutely right. Those principles, they're at the heart of everything we do. We want our students to be, well-rounded, people who can communicate effectively, think critically, and really engage with the world in a meaningful way.
It's inspiring to see U365 putting these principles into practice,
Yeah.
giving students the skills they need to really thrive in a world where communication is so important.
We're really proud of what we do, and we truly believe it makes a difference.
This has been a fantastic deep dive into the science of effective communication. Anna, thank you so much for being here today and sharing your insights.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. I really enjoyed our conversation.
And to all our listeners, we encourage you to check out the book. You might be surprised by how much you learn and how much of an impact it can have on your own communication. And if you'd like to learn more about University 365 and its innovative programs, be sure to visit their website. Effective communication, it's a skill anyone can learn. It can transform your relationships, your career, your whole life, really. So go out there and connect with people.